love that. I love the collect we began with because it has three things or four things: read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest. And it's a kind of reference to the a passage from the book of Ezekiel, where at one point Ezekiel gets this scroll that comes in and flies in, and he eats it, and it tastes like honey, and it nourishes him and keeps him going. And I love that. It's possibly from there that we had the the candy bar known as Bit of Honey, but maybe not. But what I like about it, particularly, because the work that we have to do is to find our way in the midst of the scripture, and to find our way in the scriptures in such a way that they become something that nourishes us, gives us life, helps us grow. And at the beginning of this course, I did a kind of massive overview of the history of the Psalms, and we noted that they came out of a tradition of prayer. Some of that was borrowed from Ugaritic and from the Canaanites, and it was one of those ways in which the Israelites found their way to God. And then we talked about the different kinds of Psalms and the different compositions within the Psalms. And then, so pretty. It's a piano bar, folks, over here at the Wallgast house. So sad you're missing it. JJ's on the piano and playing just out of her mind. It's so, and
wait, Bill, you can't mute JJ.
Yeah, exactly. I can't. Chris, help me out. But after that overview, Chris did a beautiful discussion of the Psalms as a kind of way in which we become honest before God and as prayer. And we went through that. And now what we're going to do is look at the Psalms as a way of experiencing profoundly God's and our sadness and joy. And these are Psalms that we have, and I've got this little thing going here, but this class is in some ways the one moment at which it really is going to come to the fore for you. My hope is that when you see this, you'll start to see the resource that the Psalms can be for your spiritual life. It'll continue to help you, nourish you as you make your way, something that you can read, mark, and learn, and inwardly digest. So let's begin with this concept of sadness, because in the Psalms, basically it has a very specific understanding, which is that sadness is expressed in the Psalms through Psalms of lament. And lament is a kind of ritual complaint that is made against God, against our enemies, and against oneself. We lament what's going on. It's not merely a kind of emotion of sadness, but to lament is actually to experience a kind of way of expressing your whole self being crushed by something that happened in your life, a kind of trauma that's affected you. And the problems that cause these laments in the Psalms, sometimes it's yourself, sometimes it's caused by others, and sometimes it's a combination of the two. These are things that happen to us. And laments also speak with a personal and communal voice. So you'll see oftentimes this dialogue that takes out in a lamenting psalm between my heart being broken and our heart being broken. And it's understood that you are kind of not just yourself, but also in community. And of course, that has two folds to it. To add a little bit of something to what I've written, the assumption is, of course, that the whole nation of Israel is a kind of entity and identity that you carry within yourself as an individual citizen of Israel, but also that when you would get these Psalms, you would receive them from a priest when you're at temple, looking for God, seeking solace, and you would get someone else's prayer. And so when you prayed the Psalms, you immediately were part of a community. And so there's this interesting kind of play in every psalm of lament or sadness, the same with joy, between an individual hurt and a communal hurt. And so always attend to that. And the structure, this is a really simple structure. Biblical scholars will argue about this till the cows come home. There are some structures that have 11 different categories. I like 3 because you can't argue about 3. And basically, the threefold structure of a psalm of lament is there's a complaint against God. There's always a complaint against God. The problem is God. God is put us here in this place. There's a complaint against an entity. The problem is external. And there is a complaint against oneself. The problem is internal. And that threefold structure is something you'll see again and again and again. And you'll see it particularly in Psalm 22. I picked that out of the barrel because it's one of the more important psalms. It was a psalm of lament that was often done in the face of death. And of course, Jesus and the gospel accounts of his crucifixion, and Luke, just before he dies, he says the first line of Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? And for me, that is an incredibly powerful use of the Psalms, because what Jesus is trying to do is he's in the midst of dying, he's trying to say the Psalm of Lament, and he doesn't finish it. He dies before he finishes the Psalm, which is, for me, a kind of indication that there was a kind of ritual failure that happened in the midst of the cross. Everything broke down. And the beauty of that for me is also that when Jesus begins that Psalm of Lament, as he goes to his death, of course, we have the opportunity to complete that Psalm of Lament for him, for us, and for others. So this, you'll see here in Psalm 22, a complaint against God, verses 1-2, a complaint against one's enemies, 7-8, and 12-13, and a complaint against oneself, verse 6. And it's a very small moment of self-loathing, but I still like Psalm 22 anyway. So, and here, as I said in the first class, you have this header, which is a superscription that happened at a later date from the earlier Psalms. We're not always sure it always connects. So it says, to the leader, according to the Deer of the Dawn, which was a piece of music. We don't know what it sounded like, but we can almost imagine the Deer of the Dawn would probably be something light. I don't know. And the Psalm of David, we're told that David wrote the Psalm, which we know isn't true, but it's nice to think of it that way. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel, and you, our ancestors, trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted, and they were not put to shame. But I, as opposed to all these people before me, but I am a worm and not human, scorned by others and despised by the people. All who see me mock me, they make mouths at me, they shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord, let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. Now, fascinating line that is. Yet it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth. And since my mother bore me, you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. So that is a kind of movement through. We have, again, another movement in which we talk about others. For dogs are all around me. A company of evildoers encircles me. My hands and feet have shriveled. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots. Now, if you attend to the gospel accounts of Jesus' death, the people who wrote those accounts saw a resonance between this psalm and everything that was just said right there. I can count all my bones is a classic move where they say he's hanging on the cross. And also that they divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast they cast lots. That was also a kind of fold in the narrative around Jesus's death. Now, do I think it happened that way? Maybe. I tend to live in trust, but my own view is that it was more than just showing you that Jesus conformed to Psalm 22 that was trying to be conveyed. It was a kind of sense that Jesus himself is lamenting and experiencing the psalm fully. But you, O Lord, do not be far away. O my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. So before I go to that, someone had their hand up. Chuck, did you have a question?
Do you have an estimate of how many centuries before Jesus those were written?
At least 300, at least. Yeah, maybe 500. But again, I'm one of those people that I would believe in Jesus, even if he didn't somehow have like the figure of Christ in the Psalms that we say. I do think it's beautiful and powerful that you can see a kind of image. But keep in mind also that we've been worshiping Jesus for a long time, and we're going to naturally have like, it's a little bit like in the old days. Remember before smartphones, when you go to pick up somebody at the airport and they'd say, oh yeah, you'll see him. He's wearing a green sweater, man of a certain age. He's got a blue mask on, and you'll kind of look around the baggage claim, and then Chuck will show up and you're like, there he is, right? Same thing happened with the people reading the Hebrew Bible when they encountered Jesus. There was a kind of thing. And of course, the fact that we know Jesus means that it goes quicker. And sometimes we sometimes see Jesus everywhere. That's not a bad thing, but it just means we can't prove it. So,
Bill, before you go
yes.
on, Eric Linder had a question online.
Sure.
And I can't rephrase it. So if he could unmute himself and ask, that would be fabulous.
Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes, I can. It's shocking.
Thank you. Sorry to shock you. Going back about 4 minutes, were you telling us that every Psalm of Lament automatically and always contains a complaint against God, a complaint against enemies, a complaint against self, or that they can vary among those?
So I actually think you'll find that threefold structure in almost every lamenting psalm, which is why I kind of pulled back to the threefold. I don't want to make a universal claim, because I'm sure and then what happens, Eric, when biblical scholars get into fights over this, someone will say, well, what about this? And I'll say, well, that's not truly a lamenting psalm. You know what I mean? So, but you will often find, for the most part, complaint against God, a complaint against one's enemies, and a complaint against oneself. Now with Psalm 22, that part of verse 6 is a really small element of self-loathing, right? Compare that with self.
To be honest, I disagree with you. I don't think it's self-loathing, but I wouldn't go to the mat about it.
Sure. Well, I can live with that disagreement. I'm a worm. People, maybe it's a mulligan in terms of biblical studies, but but what I would say is this kind of triadic structure, it gets minimized in certain psalms and maximized in others. Compare it to, for example, to Psalm 51, in which you have a much more, wash me from my iniquity and I shall be white as snow. There's a kind of element of the self is the primary thing. So that threefold structure recurs, but it has different emphases, is what I'm suggesting.
Thank you.
So this is the person who I read that I enjoyed the most this week is C. Hassel Bullock, which, despite a rather strange name, is a very good biblical scholar. And it's called Encountering this Book of Psalms 2018. This is the second edition that I went with. And this is what he writes. And And this is about the honesty of lament. He said these psalms are basically prayers as the psalmists lay their problems out on the table before God. While the boldness and naked honesty of the psalmists may shock us, this attitude is nevertheless instructive for our own spiritual lives. We sometimes hold back too much from God, conceal our true feelings in prayer, and create a false image of ourselves at the heavenly throne of grace. What would happen to us and to our relationship to God if we were truly honest with him and with ourselves? Thankfully, there is a place in the biblical faith for this kind of boldness before God. I found that just to be a beautiful way of thinking about the honesty that happens in the Psalms. So there are three broad categories. Again, other biblical scholars can proliferate this. I go with three, partly because I like the simplicity and the flexibility. There are those that speak of sickness, those that speak of persecution and false accusation, and those that speak of sinfulness. And I'm just going to look at an example of each for tonight. Hope it helps. So for sickness, this is an interesting piece, a Psalm of David for the memorial offering. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath, for your arrows have sunk into me and your hand has come down on me. There is no soundness in my flesh because of your indignation. There is no health in my bones because of my sin. For my iniquities have gone over my head. They weigh like a burden too heavy for me. My wounds grow foul and fester because of my foolishness. I am utterly bowed down and prostrate. All day long I go around mourning. For my loins are filled with burning and there is no soundness in my flesh. I am utterly spent and crushed. I groan because of the tumult of my heart. O Lord, all my longing is known to you. My sighing is not hidden from you. My heart throbs, my strength fails me. As for the light of my eyes, it also has gone from me. And then I skip a bit here. But it is for you, O Lord, that I wait. It is you, O Lord, my God, who will answer. For I pray, only do not let them rejoice over me, those who boast against me when my foot slips. Do not forsake me, O Lord, O my God. Do not be far from me. Make haste to help me, O Lord, my salvation. Now, I don't want to argue a past point, but you can see those three kinds of tragic structures right there. After this long discussion of sin, sickness, right? And of course, sin and sickness were often seen as together. You see, do not let them rejoice over me, those who boast against me when my foot slips, a kind of complaint against others. And then here, do not forsake me, O Lord. Oh my God, do not be far from me. Make haste to help me, O Lord, my salvation. A kind of imploring or complaint against God. Here's a really simple one, Psalm 6. I love this one. Why is that? It's a lamenting psalm. It should not be. Yeah, but you gotta laugh to live. You know this. To the leader with stringed instruments, according to the Sheminith. Does anybody know what the Sheminith means? Their theory is that this is meant to be sung in the lowest possible voice that we have, a kind of guttural song, like a basso profundo, like Mark Myers, right? That's our bass singer, or Brandon, just a low bass voice. Oh, I don't have that capacity, I don't have that range. I sound like a, every time I order at Starbucks they're always like, yes, ma'am. I'm like, no, I'm actually a man. Thank you. Oh Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am languishing. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are shaking with terror. My soul is also struck with terror. While you, O Lord, how long? Turn, O Lord, save my life, deliver me from the sake of your steadfast love. For in death there's no remembrance of you, and Sheol, who can give you praise? I am weary with my mourning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping. My eyes waste away because of grief. They grow weak because of all my foes. Depart from me, all you workers of evil. For the Lord has heard the sound of my weeping. The Lord has heard my supplication. The Lord accepts my prayer. All my enemies shall be ashamed and struck with terror. They shall turn back and in a moment be put to shame. So there you have a kind of rebuke that comes out. It's interesting just to step back into that psalm for a second. If you look at the play upon shame, right? All my enemies shall be ashamed. I who experienced shame, right? At the first part, where is it? Anyways, you see this kind of thing in which shame is used. It's going to be at a moment they are going to be put to shame, not me. And then the Song of Ascents, out of the depths, De Profundis is what this is called in the prayer book, because it's the first few lines. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? But there is forgiveness with you, so that it may be revered. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits. And in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than those who watch for the morning, more than those who watch for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord. For with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is great power to redeem. It is he who will redeem Israel. Remember the personal and the collective variance from all its iniquities. So finally, that I want you to see as we go through this is there's also this incredible deep trust that happens in all of the lamenting Psalms. One of the things that I find so interesting about lamenting Psalms is you have to actually have that relationship of trust in order to be that angry at God or at others or at oneself. You have to have a kind of bumper pool kind of thing that holds you in place. And, you know, one of the things that I had to learn as a pastor is the people that sometimes come at you are coming towards you. And that's the good news, right? They're coming at you, but they're still coming towards you. They want to be in relationship. That's just their way of engaging. And learning to see that is essential. It also provides a context of trust out of which the relationship can be mended. And so the last thing I want to say before I make a slight turn is that trust is based in the unfailing character of God. So having done a little bit, I want to, before I jump to joy, any questions about lamenting Psalms? You like them? You're being so nice. What do you think, Tim?
Well, you know,
I'll repeat it for the class.
At one time, I always thought they were written by David, but you saying that they came from, a lot of them came from the Canaanites. Now, when the Hebrews kind of like took these on, did they change the wording?
Sometimes.
Because like you talked about Shoal and talked about.
Yeah, they would not,
Israel.
they didn't, like they took out, like Baal did not get mentioned,
Yeah,
right? And so they would use like Elohim, or they would use
Right.
Yahweh, or use a different wording. But and also what I want you to, there's two things I would want us to take home from that. One is it is important for us to be aware that these came from others, and there is a human nature that operates in the scriptures, right? But I still believe that in some mysterious way, the scriptures are also God's word. And it kind of becomes even more trustworthy to me that the fact that they were appropriated from another culture, that they have a kind of validity to me, because the people of God picked these other prayers and they said, you know what, these are helpful. These put me in touch with God, and God is in touch with them. and it kind of styled a different way of being in the world. And it's a little bit, not to, forgive me for going a little too on the nose, but it's a little bit like when you begin with a movement of recovery, and you have to trust someone you identify with, right? As much as a doctor would tell you something, right? Who trusts doctors? I mean, proceed with caution, always. But if someone who is nearby, who you identify with, tells you, trust me, I find that a more beautiful and bold thing to do. And I think the same thing happens with these Psalms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a lot of them sound like someone's personal relationship with God,
Yeah,
and that they're like taught, it's kind of like almost like a two-way conversation, but not, you know what I mean?
yeah,
But you don't hear the exact response, but it's like kind of, I'm mad at you, but yet you saved me, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's answering
Yeah.
the question.
it explains my relationship with Claire pretty well. Like, I'm angry at you, but okay, when are we going to do this together, right?
Yeah.
This kind of thing. Go ahead, JJ and
Well,
Parker.
The other thing
Oh, did you all hear that, by the way?
Yeah, we're here. I'll let you know if there's a problem.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, JJ.
the other thing that I'm gleaning out of this is that when they speak of enemies, they don't necessarily mean another group of people or another person. It can be enemies within yourself.
Yes.
It can be that self-voice
Fascinating.
that has a thought about something, and it isn't the thought that you want. So it's an enemy within yourself fighting the true nature of who God made you. So that's
I love that. I've
Is it-
never thought of that. Did you
is
all
it
hear that?
Not
Yeah,
a
yeah.
word.
So what JJ said, and I thought this was so helpful, is she said that one of the things when she reads the Psalms and she reads the part about enemies, that it helps her make it her own prayer when she remembers that those enemies are often within herself. Those are the things that the tapes that she plays or the voices that she hears of condemnation that is part of herself that she has to stop listening to listen to God better and to hear herself better. Is that fair to say? So
I think that's super.
I really love that because there are a couple of things, and I really promise I won't go too deep into psychology, okay? But there is this theory of trauma recovery, which is where you actually talk about the internal firefighter that you had that helped you get through life. And this is the person who, when you were encountering a crisis, would come out and help you survive. For me, I was not much of a fighter, but I went to an all-boys school and I had a choice. I could either run or fight, and I was too big to run. So I had to fight. And so that inner firefighter came out. I became a really good fighter at one point, but at some point I had to kind of say, that's not the way I want to be in life. And the way that I had to move past that was to actually thank that little firefighter for doing the work and to say, you can retire now. You can take the ladder and go home. I'm going to try to be an adult. And that's something that helps us. And so the enemies, often for me in the Psalms, they're the ones who second guess your relationship with God, right? They're going to say, oh, you said that, this or that, and God, but you are not who you purport to yourself to be, or you'll doubt them and it questions. And so I think that's a really helpful thing. Parker, you want to join?
Yeah, I love what I totally love what Jake said, because we are our own sinners. But going down that same path, the Psalms, the laments allow you to be angry with God,
Yes.
which I never thought of before, because I always thought, had the thought in my mind, well, God's in control. We're supposed to accept and go with the flow of the river, and flow downstream as God's
Yeah.
guiding me along my way. But it's okay to be upset with God and have that discussion with him, which becomes then a true relationship and a true prayer versus just a route memorization or just a routine
Right.
communication. So it's
It's been a
Bill,
liberty. Yeah.
Bill, that's one you could probably repeat for the at-home folks. And also we have an at-home question as soon as you're done with this one.
Sure. Parker said that one of the things that she found so helpful was to have the freedom to be angry at God was kind of healing, because otherwise, having been raised in a Calvinist upbringing where you didn't question God's sovereign will in your life, and you had to basically flow down the river and just accept the fact that God had willed it this way, and that was holiness, was to accept the will of God and not argue with God. It's liberating to be able to see a biblical piece of writing that actually encourage us to fight with God. Fair? Fair. Okay, what's the question from?
Pamela Toroff has a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. My question is pretty simple and not as deep and insightful as the rest of these have been, but I'm wondering of the full canon of Psalms, the 150 that I at least have in my Bible, how many of them are laments? How many of them are songs of joy? How many of them, how do they fit? And is that going to tell us anything about the people who wrote them?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a beautiful, 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 beautiful question, Pamela, because I almost tried to create this grid, but again, there are so many. It's probably the general, in general, at least a third of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. And then also keep in mind, you have Lamentations, you have tons of lament in Jeremiah, in the prophets. Laments happen all over the Bible. But the Psalms, the laments are a large part of the Psalms.
But I mean, in relation to the Psalms of joy, are there more laments? Are there more lamentations than there are Psalms of joy?
You know, again, it's going to be about who people fight over this constantly, but I would say there are probably more laments than joy.
Okay, I thought so.
Yeah,
I mean,
because
doesn't it get-
you have the royal Psalms, you have other Psalms that figure in, Psalms of Thanksgiving, which some right now, my approach tonight is going to be to see Psalms of Thanksgiving as largely falling under the category of joy. Of course, there are others going to argue that songs of praise are songs of joy, and we could go and we can debate this for a long time. And part of the reason why it's exciting for us tonight is because the Psalms were not organized according to joy and sadness, because those are emotions, and the Psalms were like ritually created. And so this is, but what you can see is like what even in the joyful Psalms, I'm going to try to show tonight, if I can get, if I'm really on my game, is you're going to see kernels of lament even in joy songs, even in Psalms of Thanksgiving. There's a kernel of lament.
But Father Danaher, isn't that up to the reader and how you're reading it?
Not entirely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right? Because I can't tell you, you read something and it's completely different, right?
Well, yes, how the reader interprets it.
Yeah, but your interpretation as a reader is not sovereign.
True.
So there's some play. There's the community. There's the text itself, which has its own integrity.
And also your frame of mind, what kind of mood
Sure.
you're in.
Yeah, depends on how you're hitting it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's complex, right? Because also some biblical scholars, which I like, and this is why I'm a liberal, is, and that not necessarily, you can be a conservative and believe this too. You believe that like there's always more meaning in a text, right? So there's always a surplus of meaning. So if I tell you, to go back, Shirley, oh, Israel, hope in the Lord, for it was the Lord, there is steadfast love. If I say to you that is only for the nation of Israel, I would say that that's a wrong reading. Why? Because if you step back just a bit, there are other parts of the scriptures where Israel becomes one person rather than a whole nation, right? So I think there's always more meaning in a piece of scripture. So I can't disallow things immediately, but I don't think it's only what we make it to be in our minds. I hope that makes sense. Let's move to joy. We can go back to the Psalms of Lament. I add a couple things. And of course, I have my favorite Iranian poet at the end. So the primary way that joy is expressed in the Psalms is through thanksgiving. Now, I want to lay the cards right on the table. People can argue this. And I picked Thanksgiving. Why? Because the book I was reading today said Thanksgiving, and I decided to do that. You can make a very valid argument for songs of praise. Joy, like lament, grows out of deep trust in the character of God, who has again acted with mercy and justice on behalf of his beloved people. Like the Psalms of Lament, there are communal and individual Psalms of Thanksgiving. However, unlike lamenting Psalms, the crisis is no longer, sorry for the lack of ER, no longer in the present, but is now past. And that's a key thing that we tend to miss, is that songs of joy tend to be after the fact, whereas songs of lament tend to be in. So it's assumed linguistically, I would suggest, that you'll someday sing a song of joy if you're singing a song of lament today, right? Nice little piece. And the structure of the Psalms of praise, again, threefold. You can tell it's not really true if it's just three, right? But anyways, the songs of praise typically have a threefold, excuse me. I added one more. There's a report of trouble and crisis, a declaration that thanks to God, the crisis has passed and deliverance is at hand. And then as I was preparing this lecture, I noticed, and I added it just because it was incontrovertible to me, oftentimes thanksgiving for the victory over the trouble is given as a reason for praise, right? So we'll see that kind of motivation for praise that is embedded in thanksgiving. And the context of a psalm of thanksgiving is not always clear. So sometimes you'll see in the superscription, something will be mentioned, and then it will seem like it's connected to a ritual in the community. And then actually the actual text completely means something else. And then finally, a given psalm of thanksgiving may be associated with, say, healing from sickness, but have no obvious connection to this. So one of my favorite songs where this happens, and you see this in literally every kind of study Bible translation, and I could not find today why it was called so, but in Psalm 30, they often say in study Bibles that this is thanksgiving for recovery from illness, if you look at your study Bible. And I want you to look closely and help me see that context when you see the psalm. Because what I see here is the superscription, a psalm, good news, a song at the dedication of the Temple of David. What's that?
That's a or well, but it's your body as well.
No, well, I love that. That's again, that's like changing. I love that. But it's Hanukkah.
It's Hanukkah.
When was Hanukkah celebrated? That's true. It is at December for us. 165 BC. So this is the hit, Tim. If it says you're supposed to do it at Hanukkah, how did this? We know Hanukkah wasn't celebrated until the Maccabees took back the temple and rededicated it. We know that this superscription had to come after the fact. Did Jesus celebrate Hanukkah? No. In John chapter 10, he celebrates Hanukkah. I know, right? It's just so cool. This is why, yeah, it's fascinating.
First of the second.
That second temple.
Second. Well,
Yes.
Here. So this was
So-
the dedication of the first temple.
Well, this is the thing. They're saying it's of David. It is the first one, but
it's Solomon built it.
except that it's David who wrote it. You see, David died before the temple was built. You see the problem I'm trying to draw here, right? There's a conundrum. I'm just raising this as an issue. And like this is the kind of thing, if I was a young Hebrew and I was learning this and I raised my hand and said, well, wait, David died. Solomon built the temple. Did David know? And they'd be like, yes, don't ask so many questions. You got that wrong. The real line. So you have the superscription. And then I will extol you, O Lord, for you have drawn me up. I love that. And my thing on Facebook, I'm lifting you up in prayer. Try it. It's the most beautiful thing to say. You have drawn me up. You did not let my foes rejoice over me. Oh my God, I cried to you for help, and you have healed me. Oh Lord, you brought up my soul from Sheol, restored me to life from among those gone down to the pit. Sing praises to the Lord, O you faithful ones, and give praise to his holy name. For his anger is but for a moment, his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes with the morning. As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved, but by your favor, O Lord, you had established me as a strong mountain. You hid your face, I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I cried, and to the Lord I made supplication. What profit is there in my death? So this is the encapsulated lament. To you, O Lord, I cried, and to the Lord I made my supplication. What profit is there in my death if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it tell you your faithfulness? Remember, and is it Job 27 or 28? There is a moment where Job says that he will be a heap of dust, praising God. Will the dust praise you? Will it tell of your faithfulness? Hear, O Lord, and be gracious to me. O Lord, be my helper. You have turned my mourning into dancing. The Hebrew for dancing there means to whirl. You put me on a twirl. You have taken off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy so that my soul may praise you and not be silent. O Lord, my God, I will give thanks to you forever. Now, look, here we have the superscription. I made a little trick. I apologize. It's a trick question. Jesus did do it 165 or 164. There's gratitude for healing in verses 1 through 3, remembrance of the crisis of lament, and joyful thanksgiving for God's deliverance in verses 11 to 12. Another example of a psalm of thanksgiving. This is 118. This is a little bit long, but it's gorgeous. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. Let Israel say, his steadfast love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, his steadfast love endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, his steadfast love endures forever. This is basically almost like a chant that's being repeated throughout the house. Let those out of my distress, I called on the Lord answered me and set me on a broad place. With the Lord on my side, I do not fear. What can mortals do to me? The Lord is my side, and to help me, I shall look in triumph on those who hate me. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to put confidence in mortals. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to put confidence in princes. All nations surrounded me. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. They surrounded me on every side. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off again. There it is. The lament is encapsulated. They surrounded me like bees. They blazed like a fire of thorns. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. I was pushed hard so that I was falling, but the Lord helped me. The Lord is my strength and my might. He has become my salvation. There are the glad songs of victory in the tents of the righteous. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. The right hand of the Lord is exalted. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. I shall not die, but shall I live? I recount of the deeds of the Lord. The Lord has punished me severely, but he did not give me over to death. Open to me the gates of righteousness, that I may enter through them and give thanks to the Lord. Most likely, this is a psalm of ascent as well, right? Because anytime gates or movement, you've got a movement up. I was pushed hard. Did I do this already? Yes, sorry. This is the gate of the Lord. The righteous shall enter through it. I thank you that have answered me and have become my salvation. The stone that the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Of course, that is from the book of Acts, right? This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Save us, we beseech you, O Lord. Our Lord, we beseech you, give us success. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. We bless you from the house of the Lord. So there's this final bit. The Lord is God. He has given us light. Bind the festal procession with branches up to the horns of the altar. You are my God, and I will give thanks to you. You are my God. I will extol you. I will give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Such it is with the Psalms of joy. Any questions before I move through? You see how there's that like little nugget of lament even in Songs of Joy?
Well,
Please.
My question is maybe my comment. So this really tells me that if I'm a child of God and I rely on external things to make me happy, the real joy comes from God, but I have to endure some suffering. And that's based on what am I going to put my faith in? If I put my faith in self, then I'll never really experience the true joy if I'm always looking for external happiness to give me that fix, so to speak. So does one have to really experience that level of suffering, which varies from individual to individual, to get to the real joy that God has to offer?
I love that question. Did you all hear that question over at home?
I did.
Not all of it.
So Chris is asking, is he's being so obedient. He has this mask that could stop a bullet. And he's saying,
It's upside down.
the part of it's upside down. It's fine. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. I was trying to read it. I thought it was your handwriting.
Grateful.
So grateful. To summarize, if I can, Chris, there are two things that I heard you say about joy. One is that you see in the Psalms, is you're suggesting that there's this movement towards the internal joy that's key, as opposed to externals, and trying to find happiness in externals will always make you miserable, but joy comes from within. And then the second thing I heard you say is there is a tension in the question, which is kind of comic, but a question, maybe a comedy question, is do we need to suffer to experience joy? But yeah, because suffering seems to hit us differently, almost like what Shirley said about reading the scriptures. It's a little bit up to your, what is suffering to you? What is suffering to me? Sometimes, the same person experiences, one person experiences something and another person experiences, the first person drops dead, the other person kind of keeps going. Or, I mean, that's a question that comes up with like COVID, right? I see people who are like smoking and drinking like lords. They get COVID, they're fine. You see people go to the gym and they barely make it. And you're wondering like, what cruel God came up with this?
Or an addiction.
Or an addiction.
People go to like, dying and overdosing to other people, they bounce a check and they're in need.
Right.
So
Yes.
the level of suffering varies.
Yes, it's true. They don't have, the bottoms are different, right?
Right.
And yeah, so I guess the two things, the answer, did you guys get those?
No.
So the first thing was about joy, internal or external. I'll just piece it and go. The question was joy, internal and external. The challenge about the Psalms is that it doesn't make a hard distinction between external and internal joy. And in part it's because you're dealing with a lot more material scarcity in the context, right? So to get blessed with prosperity was a good thing, right? Now, there are parts in the Psalms where it says what little the righteous have is better than the great riches of the wicked, right? So there is certainly that. But the Psalms, they will enjoy things that are material, right? It's part of God's, it's good to enjoy those material things. The problem, of course, for us is when we make those material things God, right? That's the challenge. And then the second thing I want to say about this thing between internal and external joy and this is not profound, but I find it profound. It's not original, but I find it profound, is, happiness and joy are very distinct. So happiness is a place of pleasure that you experience when you have an accomplishment, or you get a new thing in your life, or you have a new relationship that you're excited about, a new person. But joy is always relational. And joy is something that you experience in the presence of another, and it's the sense that you know through that relationship why you have been created, why you're on this earth. And so joy is, I think, deeper than happiness. And of course, happiness is always going to be a moving target. There's always going to be a greater high. There's always going to be a bigger car. And the problem we have, because we are restless souls, we get one car and we think, right? And there's another one. There's always another car, or whatever a car is to you. I'm not as, fixated on cars. I have other fixations. So that was the first thing I would want to say, is like joy is relational, but it is material. But it's not a counter. It's not an idol. And then the second thing I want to say about joy and suffering, and just to repeat it one more time, is that must you have all this suffering to have joy? The psalmists say yes. Now, whether that's gospel to you or not, I don't know, but it's ringing true to me more and more.
Right.
But it's suffering or struggle.
Well, I like that, because struggle is a nice way to frame suffering, right? But suffering means anytime you're beholden to another thing that's more powerful than you.
So, I mean, yeah.
So I want to read you something. I'm going to take a risk, okay?
Thank you.
Can I take a risk?
Yes.
I made a friend the other day, and he's someone who I admire. He wrote an incredible book. Suddenly we're on the phone, we talk, and he told me about his child who is just his child had a brain tumor, and has been struggling with mental health issues. And my youngest child suffered with mental health issues and still does. So this morning I woke up and I found myself praying for him. And I wrote him this note. Just a quick note to let you know that I'm praying for you and your son today. As I mentioned, we can relate completely, as speaking of Claire, myself, our youngest daughter has struggled and courageously battled significant mental health issues for the past 7 years. I know too much and ironically too little to try to explain why God allows such things to happen. But I have found that managing these challenges has deepened my prayer life in ways that would not have happened otherwise. I did not expect such a blessing, and if given the opportunity, I honestly would exchange it for a return to the way things were. A deepened prayer life cannot balance or compensate for the sadness we experienced, but it has helped me carry the burden by placing it in God's hands. All of this is to explain why I find myself up early praying for you and your family. May God bless you and yours today. May God's love surround you and lift you up. May your son's recovery move forward step by step. May the time away, he's going on vacation, in warmer and sunnier settings, give you both the time and space to heal. Now that was an experience for me of joy. Writing that email this morning was a joyful thing for me to do. It was out of deep pain. And I think that's the kind of joy that the Psalms of Thanksgiving speak to. Just go ahead.
Well, that's beautiful, because I think I was reading the chapter about it, is sharing that suffering, and we only be able to connect with another so we can experience God's grace and joy. Because if I don't share my suffering with another who may have suffered, I'm not going to be able to get that light brought out.
Yeah.
That light will light onto what the real root of the problem is, and then having the connection with somebody else. Like you said, the trust is so important. You see the person right before you and say, yes, I've experienced that too. And that's that really wonderful thing that happens when two people come together.
It is a powerful experience of joy. And when we did the dental clinic
Yeah.
on Sunday, we were pulling people's teeth, right? And I was so happy, right? I mean, it wasn't like, I'm your dentist from Little Shop of Horrors, but I was just like, I was watching this community come together in the midst of massive suffering, and we felt so empowered that we could do something. I think that's what the Psalms are about, in a sense, the Psalms of Thanksgiving. And Parker likes the word struggle, which I like too, because I think with suffering, we always shake our fist at God, but maybe that's not so bad. But we tend to like think, why? And I just don't ask why anymore. I know too much and too little. That'll be for other people.
Can you give your definition of suffering again? I like
It's
that.
anytime you're under the power of another thing, right? So like when you're like the whole thing of like a suffering alcoholic,
Yeah.
right? It's that alcohol has power over you. What else? Any questions at home? So, because I can't, it's just, this is Syed's Psalm of Lament, and I find this fun. I don't think you like it, Shirley, but I like it. Lord, praise me, because I have endured much without a single sign from you. Perhaps you're only the echo of my cry. If so, help me make a song of my lament, with which approaching strangers might warm themselves. I love that. I don't know why that touches me so.
Is that praise, lament, sorrow?
Well, and Syed always kind of mixes it together, but the fact that he said a song of lament, and it's like almost between the two, don't you think, Chris? Because he's like right on the edge, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of my take on a lot of the Psalms. They do overlap. So this business of trying to categorize them is,
It's kind of futile, but it's also helpful, right? It's like, there's some they help you understand what's going on half the time, and then the other half of the time you see them just crisscrossing like traffic.
Why do you think that's that last line? Do you think that means that that strangers might see, like, well, I'm glad I'm not him?
That's I think what so Saeed is like, he's a truly strange guy, right? Just to begin. But what I like about it, to make a song of my lament, when you hear someone sing a sad song, you're pulled out and you feel less lonely. Right? When someone sings a sad song and suddenly you're sad too, but you're so happy to be experiencing that sadness. Go ahead, Tim.
Does that mean that if he makes a song of lament, that strangers are like reveling in his suffering?
No, they actually find it a place of warmth and healing and sanctuary. Right? So like keep in mind, approaching might come and warm themselves. Like they're at a cold night to hear this song of lament, they pull in. It's but yeah, maybe I'll stop using this guy. I just find it so. I'll try.
hey, Bill,
Yeah.
before you go on, Janet Doherty has a question at home here.
Sure.
It's a comment and it's about you, but you can reject it totally.
Okay.
To me, the last few lines are just the story you just told, where you took the song of your lament and your family's lament and were able to approach a stranger who you connected with, who found warmth in your story.
Wow. That's beautiful. Really. I'm very touched by that. Thank you. Maybe that's what was going through my head. And then this one, I love this one.
What was the name of it, Joy?
But this is a psalm of, go ahead, yes, please. No, okay. A modern psalm of thanksgiving. Lord, you're no house before which death loiters, no window through which I could watch the world, nor no door through which I could enter. Perhaps you're a pebble that I always carry in my pocket. Look, oh Lord, I'm close to you. I find that sweet.
It's very sweet.
I know. I just,
Kind of like the starfish on the beach.
I know, it really is. It's a very sweet thing. I know. I don't know why this, maybe I gotta stop reading this guy because no one else, but but I love this whole thing here because it just challenges our typical way of imagining God, which I think Psalms do, right? And you're not a house. You know, of course, we know in the scriptures, Jesus says, in my Father's house, there are many mansions in John chapter 14, but oftentimes we kind of make these claims about whether you're in my house or another house, and this house is dedicated to God, no window, you know, through which I can watch the world, not a place that I can force to others to kind of, you know, I can look down or look out on others. No door through which I can enter. I can't get anything out of you. You're just this pebble in my pocket. And I love the intimacy that he achieves through that negation, right? Anyways, some questions. And we'll open it up. Which of the Psalms that we have read tonight resonate with you?
One 118.
118. What do you like about it?
Years ago, when I was teaching in middle school, I used to do a radically modified form of the Seder, the Passover Seder, with my students when we were studying Hebrew history. And sometime in the course of doing that, I began to notice that Psalm 118 was one that we always used towards the end of the service. Years later, I learned that it is an integral part of a Passover service. And then somebody impressed on me that that is probably the hymn, Psalm 118, that John says, or one of the gospel writers says, after Jesus and his disciples had sung a hymn after their Passover dinner, they went out to begin to go to the Garden of Gethsemane. And that psalm has just rocked me ever since, because I hear Jesus in so much of that psalm as he's walking toward his own death.
That's quite beautiful, Eric. I really appreciate you saying that. And I also think that's what's powerful about that. And I'll get to that the next. I have one more class, right, Chris?
Yes.
I'm gonna actually focus a lot on Christ as the prayer of Psalms, because I find Bonhoeffer's reading of it beautiful, and the fact that Jesus prayed this, you know, in the midst of going through a challenge or suffering, it does help us, you know, think about this as a psalm of thanksgiving, but you know, maybe Jesus was praying it as a kind of way as he went forward, as knowing that God would be with him. Maybe the cross wasn't just a moment of lamentation. And of course, the scriptures don't have to agree 100% for it to shed some light either way. What do others think? What do you like?
130.
130, the one we started with? No. What, is that one of the ones we looked at or no?
It was the last.
Here it is. Yeah.
Because it talks about the struggle, at least from my perspective, it talks about the struggle of the human being that you go through coming to God. If you begin at a point, unlike many that maybe it's in the path, that you in my case, I've gone through this journey of who is really out there? Is there anything? Who am I in relationship to this other being? And who is this other being? And at the end, you find that there is a loving God that cares for you and wants to hold you in his arms.
That's quite beautiful, Parker. Did you all hear that at home?
No,
Okay. This is, I almost,
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, Parker was saying that she loves Psalm 130 because it's the kind of pivot point of faith and belief in the midst of doubt and hopelessness, that we find a kind of prayer that lifts us up and finds a sense of trust in God. And that's quite beautiful. Yeah, thank you. And the waiting, right, of the soul. What do others think?
I like the,
well, I like that pebble in my pocket. It reminds me of footprint.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shirley, you liked it?
I did, because I often think that, you know, God, where are you? I only see one set of footprint, but then he's saying to me, it's mine because I'm carrying you.
Yeah, I love that. And then the God is the pebble in your pocket.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I love that. Thank you.
And occasionally the stone in my shoe.
Right, right. Like this is like Godspell, right? Isn't that? Yeah, I love Godspell. Don't I just wish, I'm like, why can't we do that again? I think it's one of the great plays, movies, musical. Others think it's not. What about others? Someone else said, go ahead. Yeah, Chris.
The song of dedication. It really hit me, that poem, because of all the struggles I went through with substances, and that my foes did not let my foes rejoice over me. I always took that as what Parker was saying, my internal thinking of doubt.
Yes.
I've done so much wrong. God will never love me. Why bother? But then I was healed. Because when I got to that point of suffering, God, that very thing I doubted, healed me. And just being able to share that with others has actually been such a wonderful thing, and watching others' lights go on. And I look at that as the mansions, because like you have a cornerstone, you build a house, rely on God, even when things don't seem to be working out, and you find out that it's the most beautiful structure. And the more you share that and show others how to build their lives back, it becomes infinite.
That is so beautiful.
And I love that, and acknowledging it, because I went from such a place of doubt to full-on celebration of it.
That is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. And I love,
And
go ahead.
that's a song. You're about
Yes.
to point to it.
Yes, right there. Weeping may
Joy
linger.
comes in the morning. Yeah.
Yeah, that to me is such a beautiful promise, don't you think?
It's a beautiful song. Yeah.
Yes.
Weeping only lasts for the night. Hold on, my child. Joy comes in the morning.
Yeah. What do others think? JJ.
Well, I just, it all relates back to Jesus. First off, we read how, my God, why have you forsaken me, which is Jesus said on the cross, but again that the suffering, and then you're thinking that there isn't someone there, but he is there, and then the joy always is there, even if you don't think God is listening to you, and even if you don't think, that you think he's left you or he's not listening to you, he really is. And I think that's where you find that word joy, which is hard to explain. I often think of you, Bill, when you're giving sermons, sometimes you say something very serious and you get this smirk on your face. And it's like a joy that can do that. Someone else says, oh my God, what did you say? But there's this, it's hard to explain the word, the feeling of joy.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Part. I like that, that's the example that shows us that, even Christ would say, my God, why did you forsake me?
So JJ, just for those of you who may not have heard, did you all hear? No, yes?
No.
Not very well.
He was suggesting that there's this there's even a joy in the sadness of the lament, because Jesus prayed it And there's this whole thing where you see all of this mocking at me, make face mouths at me, whatever that means. I think we've seen enough gargoyles to get an idea of what is a mouth. Commit your cause to the Lord. And then it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe in my mother's breast. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near. There is no one to help. That kind of radical trust. But you, O Lord, do not be far away. My help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. Wow.
Oh.
Any others? Do I go to the second question? Ooh. Oh, I'm getting sick. Whoa. Whoa. Ah, I think I just, yeah, let's do that next time. I think that was, I don't know, something is happening. What is that? That was its own kind of Selah. What do you think about honesty expressed in the Psalms of Lament?
What do we think about them?
I know, Eric, I was a softball question. How do you feel now? How are you struck by the honesty in the Psalms? What strikes you about it? When was the last time you shook your fist at God? This morning, yes. Right. You don't have to say anything else, Parker, because that's a huge thing. I think that the time I can remember, I was not a big person who got angry at God. And the time I got angry with God is I was living in Tennessee, teaching at a college. There was a young couple who were sweet, but incredibly shallow. And the wife had never worked a day in her life. And he was from a lot of money. And they had kids that were the age of my kids. And he caught leukemia and died in 72 hours.
Oh.
And I went to his funeral and I was walking back to my office. And the English professor, who didn't like me very much, stopped and offered me a ride. And I sat down and I said, I just am complaining against God because the wife and mother was the least prepared for that death, the least prepared. And yet she was facing this tragedy. And I was like, and it was weird because I was in my 30s. And it was that sense, like, why? Why did that happen? Why her? Now, and suddenly, and everything she was doing very bravely to hold a brave face and to hold their family together. And I realized just how, truly unarmed she was. That was when I felt angry. And it was just an interesting experience. I don't get angry at God often, to be honest, but there are times I get angry. I didn't get angry when my child got sick. It just isn't. I find it hard to sometimes totally relate to the anger in the Psalms. And yet I know that that's probably work I have to do more than that the Psalms are not always appropriate to that emotion. What do you all think?
I think that most of the time that we get angry with people more so than angry with God.
Right.
There's so many people out here who get angry with
And they're amazingly good targets, aren't they, Stephanie Rose? They do things that are just so worthy of anger. What it was you? Yes, Kathy.
I think sometimes I feel like the laments are almost like a process to acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to also almost like a grieving process, right? So that the shock, anger, fear, bargaining, acceptance. I love that. Tim.
I think, what do I think about the honesty? It kind of speaks to like kind of an intimacy and a trust with God, talking one-on-one, like and saying your honest feelings.
I love that. That's brilliant. What others? A bunch of hands went up over here. How about anybody at home before we go?
Bill, we're going to talk about, enemies and anger next week in depth.
Oh, never mind then.
And that's okay. It's a good warm up.
Father Chris is going to explain it all.
Because I will tell you, in all of my close relationships, I seem to have no trouble getting angry with them.
Yeah, but that's just you, Chris. No, I'm just kidding. No.
But it does beg the question, is my lack of anger at God indication of a lack of that close relationship?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that troubles me, that I can't generate more anger at God.
Pamela
Don't
Todoroff has a
do
hand
anything to ruin this good relationship we have right now.
up. Go Pamela.
Yeah, Pamela.
Just real fast, when I was first reading the Psalms as a young newly married, and I was really studying them, and one of my grandmothers, who was an immigrant and didn't speak very much English at all, we were talking. I was trying to explain what I was reading, and so once she realized what it was I was reading, she said to me, and I wish I could remember the words in Macedonian that she used, but she said to me, honey, what they're saying is that God never gives you anything that you can't handle. And I thought, that's how she summed up the Psalms. That was her, and obviously it was Eastern Orthodox perspective, so she was not Anglican at all, and she didn't have that perspective, but she was saying, look, everybody goes through troubles, and you never get anything you can't handle. And I thought, okay, that was her take on the Psalms. So
What's your take on it, Pamela?
There's some of them not mentioned tonight that you didn't talk about tonight that I'm not sure why they resonate with me. But for example, one of the Lamentations is the Psalm 71, where I think it's the one about the old saint, the old person. And now that my own mother is 96, and I'm looking at her mortality, I'm looking at my own mortality, I'm reading that one so differently than I did when I was 21. And I think that's the thing about all of the Psalms, that they are as I change, as my life changes. And yes, I have shaken my fist at God on several occasions. But I think that's where how they help me get strength. That I actually get strength from the Psalms, because I think it was said the very first night, it shows that I'm not alone in these feelings. These feelings have been happening, and these kinds of challenges have been happening to people for thousands of years. And these are just different ways of expressing that. So, but
Lovely.
God never gives you anything you can't handle. So
Eric, you were going to jump in.
I am very grateful for everything that is said here about the validity of anger. I grew up in a family where anger was considered impolite. And I have never learned either how to receive it without being devastated, or how to express it without being devastating. And that's not healthy.
Yeah.
And all I can say is that if I could learn how to be deeply angry at God, I would probably also love God better.
That is such a beautiful insight, Eric. Thank
Well,
you
for all the good it's doing me.
Well, I mean, it's still helpful. And yeah, and to go back to Pamela's point that she evolved to, just the other day I was with somebody who was dying. And it was one of those all-nighter kind of things. I woke up at like 4 a.m. and I ran over, and the hospice nurse was there, and the spouse was wearing a robe, and she was exhausted. And the hospice nurse hugged her and said, "You will be okay." And then she left. And I think about what your grandmother said, Pamela, and I think those are things that are those moments where someone says something like that. It's what we say to one another in the midst of incredible devastation. And I was so grateful for that nurse, because in a strange way, as the pastor there, I could not say to her, you will be okay. I really needed somebody, because I knew what was about to happen. Right, I knew this was going to be a mess. Right, and I feel like always I should be honest. And but the fact that the hospice nurse who had seen so much death said that, it was so important. And of course, your grandmother experiencing what she experienced, to say that is a kind of claim to faith, which is as strong in some ways as the anger, maybe the flip side of the anger. You'll be okay, the trust. So last thing, does your joy and sadness have a structure like the Psalms of Lament and Thanksgiving? This is the one I struggled with a little bit myself. I don't know about you, but my feelings are often really disorganized. They struggle. There's like not a structure. And one of the things that was raised that Eric and Chris both in their own way are kind of poking at, which is fine to be poked at because that's what our academics is about, is like, does this structure really follow in the Psalms? In a sense, I think there's always this kind of, the reason why you have these kinds of broad categories is they kind of work. But you can't say kind, you have to say kind of always, because they don't always work. But I kind of like the structure because it actually reminds me of something broader than my emotional life, which can sometimes be a bit chaotic and volatile. And like, I feel like when we are in our day and age, emotions just overtake us, right? We don't have a lot of, we don't have the ability to kind of digest them easily. We're not really given good modeling for how to manage an emotion, right? We just feel them, and they tend to be, and the Psalms actually give us kind of an emotional life that has this neat structure, not tidy, but neat. So I don't know about you, but I find the structure a point of puzzle, interesting. What do you think? Yeah.
I'm trying to listen to what you're saying, processing, because what I'm thinking is, I'm thinking of an ocean and waves as they come in and out, and you're standing out there off the shore, and your emotions are kind of like that wave breaking over you, pushing you one way back and forth as you're going in each direction, and yet there's a beauty and chaos there.
Right. And you can, so Parker said that emotions are like being at the beach and getting hit by waves. And there's a beauty and chaos in it. And the reason why the structure is intriguing to me, because when I was a little boy, I'll never forget when I was like getting pummeled by the waves. Then I realized if I could dive into the belly of the wave, it would go right over me. And then I would pop up and I wouldn't be wiped out. And that became like a whole game because I figured out how waves work, right? And so I feel like, to use the analogy, that the Psalms, when I see this structure, it's like a way in which a people who I am related to spiritually managed their emotions with God, their emotional and spiritual prayer life with God. They learned how to dive through the wave. You see what I'm saying?
No,
Does that make sense?
light bulb.
Yeah.
Light bulb, because I've always gone, when I'm struggling, I always just randomly open songs.
Yeah.
And light bulb just went on because you just described.
Oh,
my God.
God, thank you. That was you. It was you with the whole wave. So it was, no, it's pretty cool though. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
No, any questions from people playing along at home? We're almost out of time, so I guess that deafening silence means that we should stop. So let's close with prayer. Father Chris, you want to come pray? You want to pray from where you are?
Yeah, why don't I do it from where I am?
Yeah.
Where I'm at,
The Lord be with you.
and also with you.
Let us pray. Loving God, we give thanks for the gift of the Psalms. We give thanks for the ways that they open up our hearts to you. We give thanks for the ways they broaden the way we pray, the way we express our feelings, the way we can deepen our relationship with you. We ask that you would continue to be with us as we continue this series. Help us to hear you through these Psalms. Help us to hear each other as we gather, and help us always to hear your Spirit moving in our life so that we might continue to do the work to love and serve the world that you call us to do. Amen.
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 Thank you, guys. Yay.
Thank you.
That was fun. You guys made it fun.
See you next week, you guys.